Good morning, 8th grade. Welcome to week 11, day 1. Today is June 1st. I am going to take you through what we are going to be doing today. We're going to continue with our volume review, and we are going to focus today on finding the radius and the diameter of a cylinder given the volume in terms of pi and out of pi. So again, the reason why we're focusing on this is because this is something that the geometry teachers at Curtis recommended to review with our algebra students. They said that oftentimes they find that students struggle with rearranging the formulas, which is why we're taking the time to go over this, okay? So you'll go to your classwork tab. You're going to scroll down to week 11, day 1, June 1st. You'll see your lesson here. Click on it. Remember, we are using a scientific calculator anytime we work with pi, so the link is still available. Or if you use your iPhone, you turn it horizontal and you'll locate the pi key next to rand. Today, you are going to also need the square root key, which is above sine. I will show you that in the lesson. I put a picture up for you guys to see it visually, but just be mindful that you will need the square root key during today's lesson. So there's also a support link here. It's 6 minutes. It'll take you through exactly what we're focusing on today in case you need additional help. And then your lesson is here. So you'll click on that. I'm going to use my bigger version for our video just so that it's easier for you guys to see. Ooh, okay. So you have your warm-up where you're given a volume and you are looking for a height. This is what we did on Thursday. So you guys should be comfortable with that. You also had the project, which was the maze, where you were doing the same exact thing. So again, we always identify what we're given. We were given a radius of 4 centimeters and we were given a volume of 602.88 centimeters cubed. We were looking for the height. So we plugged it into our formula. We always do our exponents first, order of operations. That would give us 16. Then we multiply pi times 16. That's going to give us a non-terminating decimal, but we leave 5 digits after the decimal point for rounding purposes. And then we inverse to divide to get our h isolated. We had to round to the nearest tenth, but this would have rounded it up to a whole since that 9 was there. Okay, remember our units are singular because we are only finding a dimension. We are not finding a volume. Okay, I just wanted to mention, I know some people were like kind of curious or asking, these heights that we're finding, I know may not always come out exactly to the volume if you plug it back in to check your work, but as long as it's close enough, there's usually a discrepancy that they allow you to be like a little bit off because they know that pi is involved, which is that whole rounding issue. So it's understandable if it's slightly off. It shouldn't be that much off, but it's okay if it's slightly off. Okay. So here's what I was talking about before. You're going to need the square root calculator. So you can still use the calculator link that you were using for pi, but if you're using your iPhone, if you turn it horizontally, it's above the key that says sine. You see sine? That's going to be your square root key. It has a 2 in the check mark with an X inside. Okay, so that'll be your square root key. If you're using the link, it's at the bottom next to the ABC. All right. I did notice that when I was doing my calculations, you needed to close the parentheses to solve. So I would just be mindful of that if you are someone that is using the link instead of the phone. Okay, some of them you might just know mentally because the square roots really aren't that difficult, but just a heads up on that because I noticed that when I was practicing with the link, I had to close my parentheses a couple of times. All right, so we are going to be finding our radius and diameter given a volume. In our first example, our volume is going to be in terms of pi. So we're going to work through an example where the volume's in terms of pi, we're given a height, and it's asking us to find our radius. So I have the same problem set up on my board here. Again, just be mindful that we are first focusing when our volume's in terms of pi, and then we'll do another example afterwards where it's not in terms of pi, so you see both. So the first thing we want to do still is identify what we are given. So we're working with a cylinder, so we know our formula is still V equals pi times r squared times the height, okay? We are given a height of 12 yards, and we are also given the volume, which was 972 pi yards cubed. Okay, and what are we looking for? We are looking for the radius, so I'll put that radius equals question mark. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to rewrite my formula at the top of my workspace. Okay, I'm going to plug in what we know. So I'm going to plug in the volume. I'm not going to write V, I'm going to write what the volume is. The volume is 972 pi equals pi times, I don't know the radius, so I have to keep that there, and then times the height, which I know is 12. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to isolate that r. So I notice that multiplication is happening to the radius, so the inverse would be to divide. I could divide each of these one at a time, but we can also do it all at once. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to divide by 12 pi. Why am I doing that? Because 12 divided by 12 will cancel this, and pi divided by pi will cancel out the pi, so I'll be left with my r almost isolated, right? Because that square is still there. So I bring down r squared. Whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. So I'm going to put 12 times pi over here as well. Now again, pi over pi cancels out. That's what's nice about that. And then we do the division, right? We do 972 divided by 12 to find that quotient, and that quotient would be 81. Okay, now r is still not isolated because it's raised to the second power. The inverse of squaring a number is square root, which is what I just went over, why you needed to have that available. Okay, when you square root a square, it cancels that out and you isolate your variable. So we get r by itself. Whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. So the square root of 81, like I said, at this point, some of you wouldn't even need a calculator for this. You should know your square root is 9. Now, when we did square roots and squares and exponents in the Regents curriculum, you need to know that it could be 9 or it could be -9. But since we're talking about volume and three-dimensional figures, we wouldn't have a negative radius. So we're going to just continue to just keep all of them in the positive form. Okay, so my final answer will be radius equals 9, and then I just put the units, which was yards, and it's going to remain singular because it is not a volume. All right, so there's all your work to find that radius. Now, if they asked you to find the diameter instead, let's just say we changed it up, you would do the same thing we just did, but at this point, once you get that r equals 9, then you would just take 9 and multiply it by 2, because a radius times 2 will give you the diameter. So the diameter would have been 18 yards. Okay, so I am going to tell you, be mindful of what the question asks for. Sometimes it's going to ask you for the radius, where your work will give you the answer. Sometimes it'll ask you for the diameter, where you just have to take that one extra step and multiply it by 2. All right, guys? So everything I just modeled is in your lesson, as always. Okay, there's another one for you to try. The volume is still in terms of pi. I'll just show you the work on here. So notice we list everything, right? We had our height, we had our volume in terms of pi, and we were looking for a diameter. We plug it in. Notice we are again dividing by 7 and pi to cancel that out. We'd be left with r squared. We divide by 7 and pi over here. The pi's would cancel out on the left. 63 divided by 7 gives us 9. We'd find the square root to get rid of that square on the r, and we are left with r equals 3 because the square root of 9 is 3. Then, since they asked us for the diameter, we take that 3 and we multiply it by 2 to give us our diameter of 6. 6 inches would be our final answer. Okay? There is another one for you to try. Same idea, everything similar to what we just reviewed, so you guys could check that one out as well. Now, here's an example where we are given a volume, and this time the volume is not in terms of pi, so it's just a little bit more rounding involved. So I'm going to erase my board to model this one for you, and that's pretty much all we have to go over today. All right, so let's see. So in this problem, the volume is 794.3 centimeters cubed. And what else do they tell us? They also tell us that the height is 7 centimeters. And they want us to calculate the radius. Okay, seems pretty simple enough. So I listed it as we were going through the problem, as you should as well. Again, we're still in a cylinder, so I'm going to write my formula. So pi times r squared times the height. I'm going to plug in what we know. So I know that the volume is 794.3 equals pi times, I don't know the radius, so I'm going to write r squared, and my height this time is 7. Okay, so again, we're just doing the same thing we always do. List the information that we know, plug it into the formula to solve. Okay, so here's where it's going to be a little different this time. You can divide by 7 pi like we did before. You could totally do that, okay? If that's something you're comfortable with doing, go right ahead. The only difference this time is since pi is not here to eliminate, when you put this in your calculator, you have to put 794.3 divided by, and then you have to put this in parentheses. Otherwise, it's going to divide the numerator by 7 first and then multiply by pi. So it gets a little crazy, and I definitely see mistakes happen there, especially when we are doing this virtually and I'm not there. And you guys also don't have like this calculator, which makes it so much simpler. So this is how I'm going to tell you to do it instead. First thing I want you to do is multiply pi and 7. Okay, so it's almost like you're rewriting it in this way, using the commutative property. Okay, so we're going to do this multiplication first, 7 times pi, and this is where you want to leave those 5 digits after the decimal, okay, because that pi is going to make it an irrational number. So I'll rewrite this, 794.3 equals 7 times pi is approximately 21.99114 times r squared. Okay, now I'm going to divide by this number. Okay, so now we're going to divide on both sides. So this will cancel out, obviously, because anything over itself cancels. I'll be left with r squared, okay, equals, I'm going to divide by this number over here as well. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I just noticed over here I left off a 1, but you get it. Okay, and then we do this division. So again, you want to leave those 5 digits when you find that quotient after the decimal place to be as accurate as possible. So we'll have 36.11909. The more digits you leave after the decimal, the more closer you'll be to your actual answer. So 5 digits is usually the suggestion, but just so you know, the more you leave, the closer you'll be. Okay, and now we're back to r squared. So how do we get rid of the square on this r? Because right now it's not isolated. We find the square root. Okay, so the square root will cancel out the square. We'll be left with r. And then we find the square root over here. Now, if this wasn't a decimal, I know that my answer should be close to 6 because the square root of 36 is 6. So when I find that calculation, I am using reasonability and just saying, if I don't get that, something's up, right? But if you put it in and plug it in correctly, you should get 6.00991 ... And then when we round to the nearest tenth, guess what happens? It's going to wind up equaling that 6 after all. So we'll get r equals 6, and the units in this example were centimeters. Okay, so a little bit more work in this one, right? Because we had to do the multiplication by pi, and then we had to divide, and then we had to square root. So a little bit more steps, but nothing that you can't handle, nothing that you haven't seen before, especially when we were doing the height. Very similar. So you guys should be fine with that if you just take your time and are careful with your calculations. Again, if the problem asked instead for the diameter, all you would do is same thing, right? Go through exactly the same steps. You would get a radius of 6, and then you would just do 6 times 2. That would give you 12. So the diameter would be 12 centimeters. Okay? Good? All right. Everything again is in the lesson. There's another couple of examples I think for you to try. So same thing, right? List the information we were told, plug it into the formula. Notice I do the 2 times pi here, right? So I get this irrational number that I rounded to the 5 digits with the r squared attached. I divide by that number on both sides. 15 is not a perfect square, but I know 16 is, right? And 15.9 is super close to that. So when I take the square root, I'm expecting to get a number close to 4. And what happens? I get 3.98942 ... which rounds to 4 after all. So use your reasonability, guys. Use your number sense when you're solving these. Okay, most of them you should be able to figure out approximately where these answers should lie. Another example for you to try on your own, answer on the following slide, and then you have your exit ticket for the day. So if you go back to your Google Classroom, you'll see that form here. Again, use your scientific calculator, find those square roots, whichever one you're going to use, your phone or the link. And then when you're done, it's pretty easy today, we didn't give you guys too much. When you are done, just remember to click submit. Okay, happy Monday.